I'm Blake McCully from Cross-Eyed Airbrushing out of Calgary, Canada. I'm here to show you how to use the paintbrush with the airbrush using auto wear colors, a hot water-based paint, so let's get busy. The first step in preparing this panel is to scuff it down. We really have to get rid of all the shiny surface that we have on here. I'm just using a Scotch pad and just scuffing up. Now you can do this with an 800 wet sand as well. All you want to do is just have some bite for the paint to stick to. Anytime you get to an edge, you have to be a little sensitive around the corners and the edges. Quite often you can sand right through your clear and through your base if you're not careful with it. This holds true for any round edges or sharp edges on a tank or a fender or even a goalie mask or a helmet, depending on what you're working on. I'm just going to grab some mild wax and grease remover. Any solvent-based paint has a wax and grease remover product in its line. The mild stuff is the better with the auto wear colors. So we're just going to wipe it down here with a little bit of it. This is going to remove all the fingerprints and contaminants. Paint could have stuck to it if you had it in the shop. You just want it nice and clean to work with. We're just going to wipe it on here and wipe it off. This doesn't have clear coat on it, so we're going to pull a little bit of black off with it. I like to have it all sealed up with clear, preferably. But once we get this wiped off, we'll hit it with the same process with the mineral spirits as well. This will take off some of the chemicals from the wax and grease remover. We're really striving to get the cleanest surface possible to start with. We're just applying mineral spirits now, shoot a bit on there, and we give it a wipe down. Similar process, wipe it on, flip your rag around, drag it off. This pulls off all the contaminants. You can air dry this, let it naturally dry. I usually sometimes just grab the airbrush with no paint, just air. Dries off really quick, and we can shelf this so we can start on the next part of this project. And we have this amazing photo of this wolf that we're going to use for the next step for reference. Okay, I've also brought along with me 3 identical photocopies of this same image in black and white. We're going to systematically cut out these 3 photocopies and use them as a stencil to map out our image. This keeps your image nice and symmetrical. You can use it on either side of a gas tank or either side of a helmet, and you know the mapping is going to be perfect each time. The first one I have here is an outline only. I am going to cut out the complete outline of this, saving the positive, which is the inside, and saving the negative, which is the outside. We also have a second one here. I'm going to use this one just to cut out teeth. And this is going to be the teeth and maybe highlights, anything that's really, really bright. This will be my white stencil. The third stencil is going to be my darks. I'm going to systematically cut out my dark areas. These are going to be just my major dark areas along lips, nose, nostril, eye sections, and inner parts of mouth. This will map out all my major shapes, and I know they're going to be correct to the photo. For the next step in the project, I've grabbed myself a cutting knife. X-Acto and Excel make good models. I'm going to cut out the whole outline of the first photocopy that I showed you earlier. This is going to be cut out minus the fur. You don't need real sharp edges. We're just going to cut out the basic outside form of this. And I do this, I try to cut out a complete interior. So that keeps a frame all the way around our image. So if you can follow me through this, we're just going to just loosely cut it out. Catching, there's fur that does run out the outside of this image, but we're going to diffuse that and airbrush it and paintbrush over top of that to diffuse into the background. Now I'm cutting on a cutting mat here. Not my ideal choice, but that's supposed to be the professional way to do it. I tend to use file back cards. I find that the blade doesn't quite stick in as far. You have to brace your photocopy fairly tightly. The photocopy paper that I use tends to pile up if you don't have a brand new sharp blade on it. And as you're cutting, just follow it around nice and fluidly. The more fluid you can be in this step, the less chance you have tearing of paper. And just keep a nice steady pace. Make sure you get a nice angle on what you're working on as well. If you can set your body and situate your project so that you can get the best angle on your cuts, then everything's going to come out nice and sharp for you. I'm just going to continue on here and cut out all these little teeth in here. Sometimes you might have to refer to your reference because sometimes your reference is a little bit better than your photocopy just to see where everything is. I can tell right now that some of these teeth are a little difficult to see, so I keep looking up at my reference, which I have right next to me, just to see where everything is. You can see those bottom teeth are a little easier to see in the laser copy than they are in the black and white photocopy. Finding the right reference is always really important too. The best reference that you can find for anything, especially if you're emulating wildlife or an animal or a portrait, the better the reference you have, the better your project's going to turn out. If you work from crummy reference, then chances are your work's going to be pretty crummy. We're just about done here cutting this guy out. He has kind of a weird tuft on his neck here that comes out. I'm going to streamline that and make it a little more aerodynamic and just fluff it out. Cutting a little border here so that we have it nice and concise and our stencil doesn't fall apart. And you'll see that in a second. I'm just going to pull this out for us. And as I pop out, there's a few places where my cuts weren't too successful. So I'm going to trim those out. You're going to find the same with yourself when you do this. But now we've pulled out our positive, and now we have a one solid negative. If you do cut these ends out right here, this stencil is going to fall apart and it's not going to know how to register itself. Try to keep it all concise and controlled. I have the second stencil here now. This was our teeth and our white highlights. So now we have to really pick out what we're going to cut first. I'm going to start from the back molars. And again, I'm looking at that same reference because I'm having trouble seeing it a little bit in the photocopy in the dark areas. And this is really good to get precise. Cut it, take your time with this step and really cut out these teeth quite nicely. If you carve these out really sharp, it gives you a stencil that you can go back into at a later time. And with teeth, that is important because you tend to lose your white highlights in a project quite easily with overspray. And you can go back in with this stencil at a later time, and we will in this project. It means you can airbrush a little bit faster around it, get a little overspray, then go back in and revalidate your whites on the teeth and get them nice and bright, and then all you have to do is tint in the colors of the teeth. So this is going to work out really, really well for us. And it's all about saving time. If you can spray a little bit faster around the outsides and not worry about your overspray quite as much, then you might be saving time in this process. Really, time is money when you're done. Most projects are commission jobs, and a commission job, you're trying to make money out of it. So if you can do the process in a couple hours as opposed to 4 or 5 hours, then you're making a little bit more money on your project. This one's going to be a little trickier here. We have 2 canine teeth, or incisor teeth. So I guess on the wolf they're called canines. And I'm cutting out the first one first. The second one that's in the backdrop is a little bit darker, but it overlaps the first one because we're, I guess, not 100% on our profile. It's very, very close. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of a cheat here. I'm just going to cut out a little sliver. And this keeps the integrity of my first tooth and does map out my back tooth. Not the whole thing, but if you can take a close look there, this is the outside sliver. I'm just going to move my reference in here slowly. And you can see that little bit of an edge there. But that tooth goes right to this edge. So just catching that sliver will map it in. And then we can freehand the rest of it. I'm going to just go back here and finish all these teeth off. This process can be as tight and as intricate as you like it, or you can just do it really simply too. This is just a way that I've found that I work that goes really quite quickly for me. There's also a lot of other ways to map in projects. I tend to use this stencil cutting as a mapping process more than anything else. But you could draw it in, you could cut and mask it, but each one is going to give you a little different look. This look is really nice in the fact that it doesn't look like a stencil when it's done, especially if you handle this properly. And we'll go through that a little bit later in the video. I'm just going to go ahead and finish all this, and then we'll cut to the next section here. After we get the teeth finished in this process, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to isolate just my little highlight areas. Just the real nice highlights. Around the eyeballs are nice to do. Highlights in the fur. And this will just give you a nice mapping for where the most major highlights are. Keep in mind our first stencil is going to cut out. We're going to be spraying a lot of white there, and that's going to get everything into a nice white on our black panel. And this part can be really kind of hack. We don't have to be real professional about this area. We're just trying to find the major highlight areas. And these are markings that are on a wolf, and you can be really sloppy in this process. Just make sure your teeth are nice and tight. We're going to spray these quite lightly when we get to that step, just to map them out. If you create too many lines with your stencils, your mural will look like a stencil, and we're going to try to avoid that. We're just finishing up here the last little bit of highlights. I found a few more little ones that I want to cut out here. I didn't cut out the back row of teeth on the top jaw. Those will be validated by the first stencil we cut out, and we'll get a little bit of ghosting of white in there, so we won't need to cover those ones. The rest of these highlights, well, there's one more on the eyeball here. And it's good to study your work. You know, you're going about this, you have to look at everything that you're doing and kind of foresee where this project's going to go. I've done this process thousands of times, so it kind of goes without saying for me. But Try to visualize how the project is going to finish and what kind of steps you're going to need. Look for everything, all the information you need. You could go here and you could cut out this part, you could cut out this part and every little one and take your time and spend an hour on it. And it might help you in the long run if you have troubles finding where you need to place stuff. But for my purpose, this is enough information for me to go on. To recap here, we've got our front row of teeth on the top edge cut out, a few highlights on the nose, a few eye hole highlights. They're very crude and rudimentary. Highlight on the cheek, top of his forehead, if they call it a forehead. A little bit on the sagittal ridge that holds the muscles that go down to the jaw. A few little tufts on the top of the ear. Some lower teeth, some highlights on the tongue. And that's about all I need to go on. If you want to see this a little bit better, we put a white piece of paper behind it. You can really see the highlights well of what we've cut out here. Moving along on to the third panel, or our third photocopy, which is our darks. I've already cut out the top of his gum line, copying along the top row of his front teeth on the top jaw. I've cut out the dark areas of his eyeball, a little bit of his nostril outline. I didn't cut out the whole shape. That's not necessary because we're going to have a whole edge on his nose to work with already. And we can freehand up to that edge as well. I'm cutting out all these little dark shapes that are around the whiskers. It seems like every whisker seems to come out of a little dark mark. This is true in a lot of animals. You'll see it on tigers, you'll see it on lions, you see it on your family dog as well. I'm just cutting these out really simple. I just want to get the rows right. We're not going to use these as our final. We're just going to map them in really lightly in a transparent or translucent black or a blue-gray mixed together. Just map them in. We'll probably freehand these later with the airbrush, a little bit with the paintbrush to incorporate it afterwards. But as I said, we're just using this as a mapping system right now. I'm being a little hack here again, which seems to be the theme here. This is just to be fast with it. We just want them marked out really quickly. If you spend too much time cutting on this, it's really a waste of time. Again, just taking dark shapes and knocking them out. You're going to have to determine this with your own images, which you're going to consider a really dark shape and which is an important landmark to work from. Every image is going to have darks and lights in them, so you're going to have to determine what you need for information to go on to the next step. This is going to take a little time for you. You're going to have to sit down and do this process 3, 4 times, dozens of times, maybe 100 times before you really know which parts to cut out. And you can't teach this part really. You can just kind of explain it to you that if you need it for mapping and you find there's not enough information, then chances are you didn't cut enough out of your image. Now, when you're doing your own drawings and you're cutting out your own drawing stencil, so I could have drawn this wolf out and cut all this out, then you're going to have to tone areas with your pencil of what you want to cut out. Okay, I think I've picked out all the dark areas that I need to work from, so I'm just going to show you the background here again. And these are all the dark areas that I kind of need to map from. Again, you can still go in and you can cut out a little bit of the darker ones and map out a little bit more, but you can trust your own art instinct if you're looking at your reference. You can go in here and you can freehand all this with the airbrush, and then we'll highlight it with the paintbrush and get it perfect, but you don't need everything. If you find you're struggling with the image, cut out more. It'll help you. We have our panel back. I kept it in a clean place so it didn't get dirty. And I'm just going to tab the corners down with some tape. I'm not spraying to the outside of this project as of yet. So I'm just going to tape the corners down. Now, you can tape the edges down, all the edges really good, but I like to have my project flexible. When we work, there's an ideal approach to your project. You might stand to the right, to the left, in front of it. I like to move my project around too so I can get an ideal brush stroke. You'll find that as you learn to airbrush better and you get control of it, you'll find that the right action is going to work the best for you, or pulling a stroke is going to work better. And sometimes turning your project upside down on the side will help you a lot. So I need this to be flexible after I get this mapped out. I'm going to grab the first outline that we cut out. Now this outline happens to be our negative. We're going to map out our negative on the panel to give it impact. Now, do you want to work this as a horizontal or a vertical? You have to decide that. This panel is going to be a horizontally displayed one, and I'm going to take my negative and work it around. Actually, sometimes taking the positive can show you a little bit better how you want it on there. Tilting his head up might make him more serious. You put him down, he might be attacking something low. These are all impacts that you might want to consider with every image you're doing. How to get the maximum feel out of this. If I put him way over here, it's going to force me to probably paint the rest of his neck and body. And I'm a little lazy for that right now. So I think we're going to move him back here a little bit. You have to consider your background. Right now, I'm going to go with a black background because everything's going to show up really well. Maybe later on in the project, we'll blast in some special effects background into it or something. But right now, we're just dealing with fur and this wolf, and he's going to be the most important part of this project. We're going to get rid of the positive here, put the negative down. We kind of got a placement of where I'm happy with it. A lot of times, I lay it back in just to see if I got the angle the way I like it. This is really subjective. I'm kind of liking where he is right now. I like that impact. You might have discussed if we had a client for this project, you might want to discuss with the client what they want to get out of this. Now I have some transfer tape here. There's lots of different brands out there. Any tape can work right now. This is a very low tack tape. It doesn't leave any adhesion behind. And I'm just going to skirt this on here. This is going to look after two things. It's going to keep our placement very well on our panel, and it's also going to cover up our overspray. We're going to be spraying some heavy white right now, trying to get our white base in. And I like to get everything nice and bright and then knock my darks out of the light. So as we lay this down, it's covering up the rest of our overspray panel. Always finding a pace with what you're doing is really important. Otherwise, you get a little flustered at times. You'll make mistakes. If you go too slow, you're going to lose money and lose your business. So you got to find a nice, happy medium to work within. We're going to introduce Cretex Auto Air. Most of the videos that you've seen are all solvent-based paints. We're going to use a water-based paint. I have a lot of students at the getaways that come and approach me and need some reference and some ideas and tech questions on this product. We're going to deal with this in a series of videos all based around Cretex Auto Air. This is a 16-ounce bottle. They also make 4-ounce ones. You don't need this big a size unless you're doing a big vehicle and doing a big base on it. With this size, I have white in here reduced. Now, I reduce it because it's a little thick. Even the transparent white and the detail white is a little thick to work with right out of the airbrush. The airbrush is a 0.3. It's very small. The pigment is very thick in these. You can reduce it with extender medium from Auto Air. You can cut it straight with water if you like. I tend to make my own mixture. I use Liquid Fantastic, and I cut it 50-50 with water, and then I start to thin out the product with it. I do it very slowly at first, add a little bit more if needed. Sort of melts the pigment a little bit. It dissolves it. And then clear coat it. Use your products that you're used to using from other videos that you've got and how-to texts, and really test it. And wait about 6 months, see if there's any problems with it. You're looking for solvent poppings, and solvent poppings is little bubbles in the clear. There could be little fish eyes in it, which would say you have contaminants in the paint or in your air source. But you really want to test everything you do, especially if you have a client. So get panels. Get tanks, get a helmet, and do a lot of them for yourself first. And that'll also build you a portfolio that you can show. And then take those and really look at them and inspect them so they're perfect. Because you don't want that happening to your client's project. Because then you're doing it all over, and you might even have to pay for the project that you're working on. Okay, it's time to get dirty here, guys. Grab your airbrush. Today we're using the WAD HPC. I have 7 or 8 different models, a few different makers. You're going to find what you like. Stick with what you like. I've modified this one a little bit. I have a clean out trap on it. This is really nice. It makes your grip a little easier. It changes it. But you might not like it. I also like the extended trigger on it too. You know, guys with big hands, you can jam into the cup. It's kind of nice to have the higher trigger as well. So we're going to take our mixture and just throw a little bit in there. Now I've stripped down my airbrush. Most of the top guys in the industry cheat a little bit. I've never run an end on it. I don't run my cap on it. And rarely do I run a lid either. I like it free flowing and light. And I find that most of the guys at the getaway, the top boys in the industry, they do the same thing. But there is repercussions. You do hit your needle a lot. Occasionally you give yourself a tattoo. That's sharp, that baby. As soon as you start running this thing and going a little bit, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I've mixed up my paint right now. I've got it in the bowl here. I've mixed it up 30 to 40% reduced with my Fantastic and water. What we're going to do here is map in the whites. Now the whites, you have to worry about your underspray. We've dealt with the overspray with our transfer tape, and now we're just going to go in and start mapping this out. I'm spraying in our whites on the teeth right now. I know my teeth are going to be quite bright. This is a top row of teeth. Now you can use weights or tape this down a little bit, but I just use my finger and chase it around and just
slowly move back into the image. This gives us a nice crisp edge on the teeth. But as we get into the top, we're going to have some underspray. Now, I don't want to be really, really bright there. If you take a look at our reference, especially on his forehead, there's a lot of fur coming off there. If I create a really sharp edge along that edge, it's going to be tough to get rid of. So I'm just going to dust into it on the top. And by dusting in, you pull your airbrush back a lot more, and you work away from your image a little bit. It's not going to get underspray underneath the edge, and it diffuses out nicely. But it's still going to give us our highlights in the middle of the project. And as I get to the back, I'm going to create a line right here if I spray too far. I think we're going to just go softly up to it. If we go softly up to it, we won't create this massive line. And when you create a line with a stencil, you want to be creating it for a reason. Like I'm going to create a massive one here, and we're just going to peel this back and show you. If you can take a look, that's getting a really nice sharp edge. And that's good for the teeth, but it's not the right application for his forehead. So I'm just going to keep on spraying here and laying it in. And I like to go as bright as what my highlights in the image are, and then I tone it back down. Again, back to the teeth. I spray away from my edge, and that keeps my underspray under control. And by underspray, I mean paint's going to go underneath my stencil. And if it goes under my stencil, it'll go into my background. And that creates what they call underspray. I'm onto the tongue right now. I can see a lot of highlights in my reference. I keep my reference really close at all times. I can just glance in a second and I can see where everything is, all my highlights. If you keep it away from your table and stuff, you're not going to see what you're doing. The bottom edge of his jaw is very light, so I'm not going to spray really hard. There's no sense spraying a lot of dark in here, because that's where his gum line is. I'm going to put a little bit in there, because when we get to our dark stencil, then it'll show up what we're doing. Again, soft around the edge, and we might find that this might even be a little hard when we pull it off. And when we make mistakes, I'll point it out, and I'll show you that it's going to take a little more time to fix a mistake in the long run than to do it right in the first place. This is really a thinking game. All this airbrushing, you have to think every step you go through. If you don't think it out, you're just going to make mistakes, and then you got to fix them. And the fixing takes a lot of time. Right now you can already see the overspray just kind of catching to the edge. I want to avoid that. The further back you get, the more pigment's going to atomize in it. And this is something you're going to see me do a lot of right now. You get a buildup on the tips. And that's why I don't spray the cap on there. You just peel it off. I use my nails. I keep my nails quite long to pick tape and to pick paint off. And it's a pretty good asset. It just doesn't look great. And I think this is about all we really need for this step. So I'm looking over everything here, making sure I have white in all the areas that I need. We did clean that tip there just to keep the overspray down. And that pigment flies a little bit. You'll notice when the grain of the paint gets a little thick and it doesn't atomize quite well enough for you. Now, the fact that we have this thinned out, you've got to be very careful. You just do a lot of light passes. If you do a lot of light passes and build it up slowly, it'll be fine. But when you thin it out really heavy and you lay the paint on really heavy, you get what I call skating. And the paint will sort of bubble up a little bit and run on itself. And you'll know what this looks like. It's like little pebbles. They recommend with auto air to really lay your layers in nice and light and let them dry in between times. This gives you a lot better adhesion, especially if you have to tape over it in the future of the project or mask over it. It has to have time to sort of cross-link with each other, and heat is a good thing too. I carry a hairdryer usually with me, and if I get a little heavy on my spray, I hit it with the hairdryer immediately. Make sure your hairdryer is very clean. It's easy to blow in pieces of particles into it. A heat gun also works from a distance. We're just about done here. I'm just about done mapping everywhere that I want to map out on this, and we can get on to the next step. We're going to get that first stencil off here. We're going to pull the negative off. And that's as simple as just ripping all the tape off slowly. What we're going to do here is just peel it back. Now, I'm going to keep this intact. I'm just going to put it onto anything that's smooth and shiny and clean will work. So the front of your fridge, if you have one in the shop, or on a chunk of wax paper, because I might put this back on in the future, and it's nice to have all my tape already done with me. Okay, so now you can see where you made mistakes a little bit. I've noticed that we do have a little bit of underspray at the back. We kept it a little too loose. There's a few places we got a little wet, and we can see a little bit of skating. This is really mapping out, so it's not a huge deal at all. So now we're going to just move on to the next step. I've grabbed my white stencil, which is the teeth one. That's how I've labeled it. And since I still have white in the brush, I'm going to start mapping out these teeth. Now, what we were doing right now is just registering based on what we've cut out. There's areas that you've cut out in the first stencil. The second stencil is just going to overlap that. You'll see lines. I'm just registering these up really nice and tight. This is an important step to get right. Just to show the human side of this, I think we made a mistake earlier. I think I misguided you saying the top row of teeth on the top jaw was on the bottom. They're actually, we cut out the closest teeth on the top, and that's what we have right now. So we're going to map those out a lot brighter than the lower side. It'll show that they're closer to you. Again, the front incisor. I'm going to reposition my hands to keep the stencil down. And that little sliver from the tooth behind it. As we get around to the nose highlights, look at your reference again. And there it comes. And there it goes. Here again, we're going to create some lines and some edges. So I just want to dust those in nice and easy so we're not creating too big of a line. A little bit of a highlight on the tongue, a few back molars, a few teeth up here. Right now we have a little tuft of hair just at the back going in lightly. I'm spraying away from my edge because it's easy to create a line here. A lot of times you'll find in a project, if you use a lot of stencil work, that you'll create lines by overspray. So if you're paying attention to it, you can avoid creating problems in the future. Okay, let's just pull this back. And now, as you can see, we have mapped out all those little areas. They're very subtle. But that's all you need for your eye to fill in everything. We're going to switch colors, go to dark now, and I think I'll mix up a very translucent black, maybe a blue-gray into it. I'll show you how to do that, and we'll map out the dark areas. I just grabbed the detail cobalt blue. I'm adding drops to it. I'm counting my drops as I go. I'm up to 4 drops of this right now. This gives you a consistent mixture to remember for when you go on to the next step. If you have to emulate that again, I make a mental note of what I put in there. I've added about equal amounts of brown. Now, brown tends to not have the same strength as blue. Blue is a little more dominant. And I added a couple drops of detail black as well in here. This is giving me sort of a grayed out mixture. I thinned it out 30%, and now I'm mixing it up. I just dedicate a brush to it. That's why I put blue on it. It's not going to be a painting brush. It's a mixing brush. I tend to make them smaller, so I find that the big ones are a little tough, so I just break it off like so. A lot easier to work with. And if you label everything, you're not going to make mistakes. And don't mix over your project, too. Mix over a garbage can. Mix away from your project. You can see with my mixing, I've already got splash up on it. This goes onto your project, you got more stuff to fix. Right now, I'm just spraying out my mixture. I'm getting a lot of dot pattern outside of my mixture. It's pretty heavy on the blue side. I'm going to thin it out and add a little bit more brown to gray it out. Okay, I had to remodify my mixture a little bit. I added a lot more brown, pretty much doubled it, thinned it out a little bit more. I have a really nice spray going right now. Again, I have to register it. Now, this is a little difficult because you can't see your outside outlines. Measure off where you think the teeth are and your gum lines. I have to pull back quite often and just see where it sits. I have a nostril hole here on the nose that I've cut out. I can register that. I can see highlights in places, bottom of teeth. I got a gum line that's kind of showing here. And between those 3 or 4 landmarks, you'll be able to find where the registration is. If you don't get this right, you're going to have stuff that's crooked. If you spray it, then you're going to have to get rid of it. All of a sudden, you just added another half an hour to your project. I think I have it registered where I'm comfortable with. I'm just going to grab my reference. And with having this right next to me, I can kind of see where my darks are. And now I'm ready to spray. My nostril hole is really dark. I don't like working with black right off the bat at all. Black is such a hole. So I'm going to use this stencil a couple times. Right now, this stencil is just designed to map out. And again, I'm going to go really light. So you can see me kind of dust coating this on. I'm not so worried about my underspray. It can go around a little bit. It's not a big deal. Because right now this is just, well, around the teeth is kind of important. But this is just to map out where I want things, and then I'll probably map it in a little bit darker later. But we can freehand a lot of this area. When you first start, your freehand isn't going to be very good. I spent 3 hours a night for a year before I felt like I had any freehand ability at all. So it takes a lot of time and practice, so don't get discouraged. You start working with this stuff, it takes a long time to get control of this airbrush. Okay, mapped it out a little bit. Now you can see where my darks are. Quite often when you pull off your paper, it's really good to pull it off straight instead of pulling back. Your paint might still be wet, especially if you have a thin mixture. So try to pop it off high and not drag it over top of your paint. Okay, I'm looking at my reference again. I just added about 4 drops of black and thinned it out. Now this is a secondary darker mixture. I went in with a lighter mixture on my reference right now, because if I went in with solid black, and you'll see this line right here, this line is going to be tough for me to cover up. In the reference, it's a very soft diffuse line. So, you know, I maybe overcooked that a little bit. I went with a really light mixture there, so that I wouldn't create that. But these are you're going to find that these are tough to cover up. Now I'm going to go in with a darker mixture and really do my dark areas. And my real dark areas are in the eyes, around the nostrils, on the nose, around the gum line. So let's lay this out now. I got to register it again. That's going to be easy to do because those marks are already there. And I'm going to chisel out my gum line on here. Nice light passes again. I've got it thinned out quite a bit so that I can control the dot pattern and the atomization of this. So lots of light passes. And be patient with it. You go too much, you just create more problems is all you do. The nostril, you can go fairly hard. And this is 1, 2, there's 6, 7 passes in there. And they're nice and light. I keep the air running all the time that I can, especially when you're freehanding. All the top guys in the industry keep the air going down, pull back slowly. Just a lot of nice light passes on there. This maps out everything. That's fairly dark in there. The eye is still dark. And now we're just going to map out the ear slightly here too. Again, this is going to be soft and diffused, so you don't want to push this step too hard. Our stencil's all mapped out on this. And we're finding that right now, I have a couple double stencils going on. The registration wasn't totally perfect. Of course, we talked about a little bit of overspray. All these things not a huge deal right now for us, especially when we're going to put a background in. But we've mapped it out not so bad. So now we're going to discard all of our stencils. We're going to set those aside for now. And we're going to work on some freehanding with this now. And we're going to control it really tightly. Work slow at a pace that we can all keep up with. And then we'll see how far we can get with it. Okay, I kept the same mixture that I had going for the last gum line and the darks that I've punched in there. And now I'm going to start freehanding. When you're freehanding, it's really nice to have some control. You know, I start mapping it out really slowly. If you can see, I triangulate my hand and I guide it. What this does is it really keeps my hand steady. And I look up at my reference quite frequently. And I'm just going to chisel in my darkest areas right away. And just blend them out slowly. So nice chisel, blend out. And you'll find different ways to work this as you start experimenting for yourself. And I'm softly going in with my dark areas. As you can see on the reference, you can see that line isn't so sharp anymore. The gum kind of blends into the face. Now, really trust what you're seeing. Trust your reference. Don't trust what you think it is in your own eye. Looking at something is really important. So I'm blending that out a little bit because I see it as a diffused line. This is a little bit darker. And it's nice to bring it up darker freehand. And what this does is it takes away that stencil look. And that's the worst part about a stencil. People rely on it too much. So it has kind of a dirty name in the industry a little bit. A lot of guys go, ooh, stencil, you know, and they get a little uptight about it. And I go, yeah, stencil, of course, it works really good. It's a really good method to work with, just as long as it doesn't look like a stencil afterwards. You know, I've done a lot of paintings where I've done multiple stencils and used them quite a bit in the project, and you can't even tell I used them. So that's what I like to strive for. And same with brush strokes. We're going to get in here, and this is the purpose of the video, is to incorporate brush into fur and into an image. So I'm going to show you how to do that as we go through this, and try to make it flawless so you can't really tell at first that you used a brush stroke or a paintbrush in it. So a lot of this equipment is really good to use as long as you use it in the right way. I think a lot of guys' problem when you see a lot of airbrushing out there, you see a lot of them use it, but they don't use it in the correct way, and maybe that's why it has a bad stigma that you're kind of using a paintbrush in it, or you're using stencils in a project. So right now I'm just mapping out these little dark areas. I'm isolating where my dark marks are in this wolf. And this is where we have to get into the freehanding. And I'm extending these out a little bit. And I'm creating some background texture quite fast. And to create this quite fast, I've got a nice angle on my approach. I'm in on an angle. What that does is it takes your brush strokes and spreads them out nice and evenly. They're called dagger strokes when we practice them. And you can chisel them out really tight. Like you can get in there and go really tight if you want. And we will later. But right now it's nice just to map them out nice and soft. And there's areas above the eyebrow here that are darker. And I'm just laying in some clumps. This will all work as background information. Like it'll look like fur under the fur. And you're kind of painting the dark areas really slow and soft and blurry almost, and then we'll bring that detail out on top of it. So I'm just going to work away on this for a while, catch up to it in various stages here, and you can kind of see what's going on with it. I've been working away here for about 10-15 minutes here on this, just mapping out some sections. And like I say, your freehand skills might not be there yet. This might be an hour and a half of process for you to get it even to this point. But like I say, don't be discouraged. It'll go faster in time. I was pretty slow and hack when I first picked it up, and all you can do is get better. So I'm just mapping out all my dark areas right now, chiseling them out really tight, or getting tighter each time I go through it, and getting in my darker shapes, really isolating what I've got here. I'm finding little dark shapes, trying to go darker in those areas. You can see areas where it diffuses out. I'm going to try to attack those areas and just blend out our stencils that we had, so they're not so harsh. I'm just going to pick this up and show you. I've got nice little dark gray areas in there. You can still see that line that I pointed out earlier that is going to be difficult to get rid of. It's still difficult to get rid of. We actually created a little line over here with the overspray. It was very, very thin. There wasn't much there, but I'm already finding trouble covering it up. So I went a little aggressive over there. So now I've taken some of that dark and I've kind of feathered it out a little bit. You can also go in and clean the edges as well a little bit, but it does get a bit streaky. We'll identify that a little bit later in the project. And so now I'm just going to set it down. I'm going to keep working on it a little bit more, and we'll pick up on the next stage. Okay, we're still noodling away on this. And what I mean by noodling is we're going in a little tighter now. We're starting to chisel out these lines. And this is a really good time to show you how I'm really going about this. There's a lot of ways to pull brush strokes, and with fur this is really evident. There's kind of like the single stroke. And the single stroke is just coming in and you get the air going and then you just hit it and pull out of it. They're like mini daggers, and you keep this method going. So my air is going, and every time I come in close, I'm pulling back just a little bit, letting the paint go. I'll do one out in the middle here a little bit so you can kind of see it. You know, there they go. They're just coming in there really nice and lightly and pulling off. Now, in big areas, I like to do what they call a double hit. You're getting twice the value for your money. And I'm hitting it on the front stroke and the back stroke. So you keep your air going, you go bam, 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 like this. And each time I'm going back, I'm getting a stroke out of it both ways. And this really fills your background really fast. And again, like I said, time's money on this. So I'm hitting it fast. Now your rhythm is important here. You got to get that pace with your finger pulling back at the same time each time you hit it. So start off slow. I'm going to just flip this over and show you. If you start off really slow with it, like this, back, forth, that's a good way to get that rhythm going in your head. Real slow. And then you can speed the pace up. And then when I start working, I'm bam, 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 like this, getting them in as quick as I can. Try that on something that doesn't count first, and then you can apply it to your project. So I'm just pounding these in really tight and fast. And this is chiseling out our wolf. And a lot of times your wolf looks really good after this stage, and you don't have to go into a brush stroke. So I'm just going to continue on here, just pounding in these little brush strokes. And all I'm doing is picking out all my little dark areas and just trying to get a little bit of a soft texture to it. And this is going to be important for when we introduce the paintbrush. So we're going to clip back to me here after about 15 minutes or a half an hour of working. We should have this pretty tight at that point. Okay, welcome back. We're just cruising away here. I'm knocking in some more spots here that are getting a little bit tighter. Same strokes as we were dealing with before, only getting a little tighter. With the wolf here, too, it's very important to look at direction of fur. The fur has a nice, it's almost like a wood grain. It flows in such a nice way. You know, they start off really light and tight in here, and they bend up this way, and then they bend down that way, and it curves and rolls around. It's very important to get your direction right. If you don't get the direction right with what you're going, it's going to flatten this out, and you're not going to get cheekbones protruding out, and you're not going to get highlight areas pounding out where they need to be. So really watch your grain. Trust your eyes a lot. Your eyes see a lot, and just don't think that all the fur goes flowing back. It actually does curve and mold and flow around. So getting the direction of the fur, I can't emphasize that enough. It's super, super important. I see other pieces of work that other artists have done coming in looking for a job from me, and I look at it and go, wow, you really didn't open your eyes and have a really good look at what's going on, because there's so many problems with a lack of looking. So really trust your eyes and really push it really hard. We're going to have another title of a video coming out as well. It's all about tech tips and how artists crater themselves by making mistakes. And I'm going to really dive into all these problems that you might experience out there. And it's going to be really valuable. I'm more excited about that video than this one. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be pretty harsh on you, but it's going to help you. A lot of the tips that I try to put out sometimes took me 7-8 years to learn. And I wish I had learned them in the first year, because it would have saved me a lot of grief. Most of the stuff that I'm teaching you right now all comes from teaching my students at the getaways and guys that have worked for me. I'm pretty much all self-taught, so I'm a little unorthodox in the approach, but I think you'll probably relate to it after you get through a couple of these videos. It's going to do nothing but improve you. So right now, we're getting really, really close here. This project that I'm doing right now, if I was doing it in my studio for a client, I'm going to spend 8-10 hours on this. We're going to do it tight enough so that you can see what we're doing and it still looks good and you understand every step. But each one of these steps that I'm taking right now, I would take a little bit further than I am right now. And you might work on this for 25 or 30 hours. I had an assistant do this same demo to learn fur, and he went on it, off and on, off and on. He probably spent 45 hours on this wolf head. When he was done, it was spectacular. It had such a density of color, and it was so soft and beautiful, and it was better than the one I had done to show him. He spent that much time on it. Now, that wasn't feasible. He would have lost his shirt financially on it, but you can push it that long, and you got to come up with a happy balance of when you're really happy with it. But don't be afraid to spend 40 hours on this, if you have the time to do so. I've changed my color now. I've gone into a little bit of a gold transparent. I'm working all in transparents, a detailed graphic red, and a root beer brown. Now I've mixed them all together, thinned them out a little bit to get a warmer color. If you look into the reference right here, you're going to find out there's a lot of gold in here. We got a few areas that we got to push it into. So at home, I would be mixing my colors up a lot and changing them, adding browns. I would have probably done 6 or 7 color changes at this point in the project. but I'm trying to break it into stages that you can follow. There's a lot of warm colors on the back of his neck. Now, this is very loose right now, meaning loose, I mean I have really thin color. So I'm laying it in really light, lots of light passes. You can see that yellow is starting to build up. There's a little bit of warmth on the inside of his ear. I'm just kind of tinting some areas right now. And I'm finding that I'm a little bit too yellow. It's not coming out as warm as I'd like. So I'm just going to quickly drop in here 2 drops of red and then another drop of brown. Quickly going to do a mix. I was really thin, so I'm not going to thin it out anymore. I'm doing a little quick spray out. See how much warmer that is? And back in again. That gave me time for that yellow to dry a little bit. Your flash time, and what we call flash time, is when you can touch your paint. If you thin it out, most of the stuff dries fairly quick. You know, a minute, 30 seconds, sometimes immediately on there, depending on how thin your mixture is. You'll get a feel for that as you work with it. And different colors dry at a different pace and a different rate. And if it's thinned out or if it's opaque makes a difference. And how thick you apply the paint makes a big difference as well. He's got some color in the eye too. So I'm going to go throw that in there right now. Now, we're not doing anything real detail yet. Quite often, you know, if I'm working at home and I want to finish this, I'm going to go in there and I'm just going to chisel it out really tight. And this is how you'll end up working as you get better. But at first, you're probably just going to be doing exactly what I'm doing right now. There's some gum that has some colors in the gums. And since we have a warm color right now, we shouldn't lose this opportunity of wasting time to remix. Let's throw them a little bit of color into these teeth. If you look really close at our reference copy, there's lots of warmth in these teeth. Yellow and brown together quite often, or like a root beer, mixed very transparently, makes a good tone color for teeth. The bottom ones have a little bit more blue in them because they're in the shadow area. Mixing color is really important. If you mix the right color, quite often it does what it wants for you for the project. It'll lay it back into the right area. It'll bring your highlights out for you when you need it. And there's a lot of warmth in this tongue too. So I'm going to tint that right now a little bit and get it warmed up while I have this color on the go. This should be dry up here again now. It's about a minute and I'm back into that color and warming it up a little bit more. Still a lot more warmth around here. So I'm just tinting it in slowly. Now if I want to get this nice and red right away, then you might want to go to more of an opaque color. But translucent paints and transparent paints, I love working that. It just looks a lot deeper than the opaque paints in this case. So I'm just going to keep tinting them and just taking my time and showing some patience with it. Because if you go too fast, they'll skate. And then when it skates, it builds up and bubbles up and sort of pills up. And you'll see that immediately too once you make that mistake. You know, I can show you on here a little bit. There, see, look at how fast that just runs. Spider webs on the side because I'm pulling back too far. Pretty much the whole project here, I'm not pulling back more than a couple millimeters the whole time. And just going really thin layers of it. So I'm just going to continue working on this and just saturate it a little bit more, and then we'll continue on with the next step.
Okay, I'm working away here. I've taken a yellow and root beer mixture, and I finished up a little more of those colors. And now what I've done is I've added a little bit of detail black to this. And this is where I start chiseling out things a little bit more. This is like freehand, and I'm kind of drawing. I am drawing with the airbrush right now. And just mapping it out, chiseling around the teeth. And this is, I'm going a little sloppy. And remember we had those stencils that we cut out for the teeth? That's why it'll be important, because I can go back in now and I can validate or revalidate the whites in there. Now if you're working with a candy color or something like that, you don't want to approach it this way. Candies have a bleed through, so you have to really be militant in saving your whites. But here, I'm still saving my white, but I want to be able to go back in with my stencil and get them back in. So I'm just going to chisel these out until I'm kind of happy with it. And by the word chiseling, I mean I'm just starting a really tight line. I'm going around my tooth, and then blending it out into the gums, and then slowly into the teeth. And I'm looking at my reference just to see where the dark edges are. There we go, just follow it around. Then blend it out. I went into a little bit darker black now, and just in the real darkest areas I've been chiseling out the black and working out the darkest holes in the fur. And in the nose and in the nostrils, a little bit in the gums. And it's starting to come together now. It's actually looking really sharp, although we can make it really good when we get into the paintbrush, where we can really get the detail in there. I brought back our initial positive. We have a pure black background. We're going to use pure black. We're going to just get rid of some of that overspray. Now I'm going to keep this stencil fairly loose. Remember we got that underspray before that created these little dots? Now what we're going to do is we're just going to go back in and we're just going to pull it up a little bit and feather it out, because I don't want to create a line the other way as well. And this just looks after our overspray. Granted, we've got a really easy fix here with this. Because it's black on black, it's pretty easy to fix up. Now, if we had a nice candy color underneath there, that flexibility isn't there. So we might have cut and masked this job out and maybe used a stencil over masking tape or cut a stencil out for it. Or we could inversely go back in with Q-tips and we can actually clean off that overspray, providing we have a solvent-based background and not a water-based background, or we could have sealed it up with clear first before we do the cleaning. So this really got rid of that quickly, and I'm just going to pull this away and we're going to move over to the back of them. We still have that line in there a little bit. Now that I have a heavier black, I'm just going to blend this guy out into the background. And now that line is starting to go away a little bit. And a good way to check that out is after everything dries, we can go in with that wax and grease remover. We can lay it over top of it, we can pound it on there. Don't wipe it really hard. And you can kind of see what it looks like with clear on it to make sure you got rid of all your overspray. And we'll demo that a little bit later on here so you can see how it looks.
I just did a quick clean out here. Clean the brush really good from this stage. I went from black to white, and a good flush on your airbrush is a really good thing. You don't want to leave any pigments in there. They'll come out as a little splatter, especially if you're doing big graphic shapes. And right now I'm just chiseling out some highlights. My brightest highlights in this wolf, and just catching the edges. This is building a bigger, deeper base to the fur. If you take a look in, if we can pan up to the bottom of the ear here, we can see little clumps of hair in there that aren't very bright in this. So I'm just building it up in the shapes that they are, pulling them out. Because the fur right there is coming out right at you. So you got to change the direction of your fur. This is where you have to be really tight. And honest to God, to paint this tight right now, if you can do this in your first year of airbrushing, you're doing really, really well if you can pull that off. So don't get discouraged if you can't pull these lines right now. The mixture is really thin. It's easy for it to skate, so you're going to pull really thin strokes, really light. Don't pull back too far. And this is just giving me my highlights. Now I'm going to try to keep this a little bit darker than I need, because when I go back in, the next step is with the paintbrush. And the paintbrush is going to be a really translucent mixture that is going to add to this and make it brighter. So we want the whole piece to be just slightly darker than what we want it to be in the finished result. So that means that'll make our white highlights stand out. I have to get my painting moved because I'm seeing the reference changing and I don't have a good angle to make this successful. So what I'm going to do is just move this out a little bit. And I'm going to reach across, grab my reference, and if we can have a look at this reference here, what we have here is fur starting this direction, and by the time that little highlight's done, it's almost changed a complete 90 degrees, which means if I'm spraying from one angle, and we'll go back to my painting, I'm going to have to move with that painting. And now I move around the project a little bit as it flows to the front. Sometimes I'll tilt this project 5-6 times just in a little section like that, just so I can get the best angle on it. If you get a bad angle, what will happen is your airbrush won't spray very well for you. You'll get a lot of clumps and spits. I've worked around this a little bit. We've got just little highlights coming into the fur, and right now I've got some really bright highlight areas. And I got a really thin mixture here. So right now I am doing multiple passes over top of it. 3-4 passes in those same highlight areas. And that's just to get the brightness out of it. You can kind of see just passes over pass over pass, and it's starting to come out. You got to go really thin though, or it's going to start to skate on you. And then I'm going to work down here, and I see a whole bunch of highlights in the gums. Now these are really bright, solid highlights. And these are the little reflections off his gum lines. So I'm just going to go in and just do these little shapes quickly. These are fairly inconsistent highlights, and try to stay away from the real cheesy starbursts and stuff. Like really look at these shapes and try to emulate them if you can. And again, this is really thick. The mixture could probably go a little thicker for this if we wanted to right now, and it wouldn't be a problem. Because this is skating a little bit for us. I'm just cleaning it out a little bit here on the tongue. And back in again. There we go. That's not looking so shabby.
So we're just going to tie this end up now. I'm pretty happy with what we've done in the past hour. It's turned out pretty good. We're going to introduce the paintbrush now. Okay, I've set up my workstation here. I've turned the wolf around to the side, and I've put in a little bit of cleaning fluid, and that's airbrush thinner. That would be my liquid fantastic with water mixture. And I like to thin out my white. I've put in a little bit of detail white here. There's lots of products you can use here. I'm using the Auto Air Detail White, and I like to thin it out. It's also nice to have a little piece of wax paper next to you. This is photocopy paper, but it's kind of waxy. And what I do is I try to wedge out my brush a little bit. Check for loose hairs. If you can look at this really closely. If you notice right here, I've looked at my brush. I have a stray quill that's kind of bent off to the side. This is a brand new brush, but they're not always perfect to start with. Sometimes you have a longer one on the tip as well, so this has to be trimmed down. This just makes sure that this brush is working really well here. Now, when I load up my brush, I like to load up the quills fairly thick, and then I run them out a little bit so you don't get a big gob at the end. And this is the problem with a lot of people using a paintbrush with their airbrush. They tend to load this up and it goes on so heavy and thick. And when I load up my brush, I like to pull it both sides, flip it 180, do it again. This gives me a wedge a little bit. This gives me a little sort of like a knife blade wedge to a pointed brush. And then you keep that point on a horizontal a little bit, and then you start pulling your brush strokes very lightly like this. And this is a very thin mixture, so it's going to go on very transparent on the painting, and it's not going to stand out really bold. And that's another problem with artists that use the paintbrush with the airbrush. They tend to leave it so bold it's really obvious, it stands out too much, and it doesn't incorporate with the airbrush very well. So we're going to show you how to do it kind of seamlessly. The first one is usually the worst. You can tell right away by the very first stroke if you have too much paint on it. And then it's just a repetitive motion. Again, have your reference really close to you. You usually get about 20 strokes out of a loaded brush. Get my wedge going, and then away we go. Now I'm looking at my reference as I'm painting these. Sometimes I'm pulling 3 strokes as I look at my reference, because I'm following my reference with my eye just slightly ahead of my paintbrush. So sometimes I don't even look at my paintbrush too much while I'm doing it. So I'm just picking out my highlights, and that was about 20 strokes right there, ready to go again. This is a speed thing. The faster you can go at this step, sometimes the cleaner the strokes are too. Again, let's look at the grain of the fur. The fur and the length of the fur is important too. Around the eyes, in the snout, the fur quills are very short, so you want little short strokes. As we get to the back behind the ear and on the top of the head towards the back of the neck, it's more like a mane and it gets a lot longer. So you're going to have to pull your brush strokes a lot longer. See, this was a good load up. I might have even got about 30 or 35 strokes out of this. When you're done, this could be a couple thousand strokes. The advantage of using the paintbrush rate at this point is just for the detail freaks. It really is. This offers something that maybe your competitors in town might not do, and if you do it flawlessly, the detail will really draw people in to look at. The airbrush is a great tool, but it can't quite create this kind of detail that the paintbrush will create. It's just so sharp and crisp. Like if you can see this edge really tight, Now I have little pieces of fur coming off of there. This would take me forever with the airbrush. See how short the brush strokes are right now? These are just little tiny ones going in there. And I always like to pull the fur from front to back. What happens is your paintbrush will start off fairly thick and then it'll wedge out as you pull it away from the paint. This gives you a nice little sharp point to the end of each little fur clump. Again, that fur will get really short around the eye, and you got to watch for the swirling. They get really almost to points in here. Now, I'm working with a pure white. You can also tint your whites. You can add a drop of, like right now, it wouldn't hurt to drop a bit of yellow or maybe brown into this. Now, this is looking really stark right in here, meaning it really stands out on the brown background and that little bit of orange and red that's in there and yellow. Now, I can go back in and tint this with the airbrush afterwards, and this will start to disappear a little bit. You'll still see parts of it, but it's a nice blend back in with it. So we'll have to chase this area later, and perhaps right in here a little bit too. This is getting a little harsh as well, so I'll mix up a darker gray and go back in and tint this. I think it's faster to do it all with a white brush first if you can, and then tint it with the airbrush rather than change your color in your palette to suit each little region that you're in. Okay, I'm going to move up a little higher on the wolf right now. I'm going to shuffle my guard paper here. I have this so I can rest my hand on it without creating sweat marks and fingerprints onto my painting. Right now I'm just looking for my grain, see what direction they're all flowing and how long the quills all go. This is a good part. If you can get in really close here, you can see those dagger strokes that I'm doing right now where they start off thicker and get a little thinner. Sometimes I do these in clumps. Keep in mind that the fur kind of overlaps itself. It's nice to do it in kind of waves. Really study your reference to see how the waves overlap each other. And maybe we can go and move up to the reference right now. And what we see here is there's a little bit of waves and patterns and bands of fur. The fur kind of overlaps itself. It's a little more obvious if you can follow me down here. You can see waves in here just slightly. And this is how you have to paint then. You have to try to copy all these little patterns in the fur. You know, as it comes into the mouth, fur comes in, the top one of the jaw comes down, and they kind of join each other. You can do this and study more reference of that same animal that you're working with. And this goes for anything you're painting. Just study it really, really closely, and sometimes a secondary or a third reference till you really understand what's going on in there is really vital to your success. I'm just going to go into that area we just talked about and see how I'm pulling out. Now I'll start back down here a little bit and work my way back to it. Now it's a little dark in my reference there. These are very short, so I'm going to save a lot of that dark right around the mouth, or the corner of the mouth. And then I've got these brush strokes just kind of tying into each other. Right around the gum line there's a little bit of a shorter one. These ones are indicating that they're coming out at you. And then as soon as they get and roll around off the gum, then they can stretch out and pull a little bit more. Now this process can go, sometimes I can go 4 levels of this. I can go around this whole painting like this 4 different times. Sometimes I do it with a darker color like a mid-tone gray, which might have a brown and a blue mixture. Sometimes I do it with a darker with a little bit of black in it to get my dark lines in. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to stick with just a solid white, and then I'm going to show you a few more techniques that you can incorporate other than the paintbrush to get detail. I'm going to move back up above the eye. We dealt with this area before. Remember we had a fan that came out, it started and it changed about 90 degrees from where it pulled. Now I'm going to do this with the paintbrush. In order to do so, I want to pull it around upside down because I want to pull those brush strokes towards me, and that'll narrow out the wedge. I'm going to move my guard over here so I don't leave a fingerprint. I'm going to turn my reference around so I can see what I'm doing and continue on with my brush strokes. Again, this is a speed thing. The faster you can go, sometimes the better the quill lines are. If you slow it down, you're going to get shaky with it. So it's good to go fast. And as it gets to the eye, I'm shortening up little ones. This will give a depth of field, meaning the shorter ones will be closer to me than the further ones back here. Or at least the eye will perceive it to be so. What we're doing is really creating illusion here. You're working with a 2D image that's very flat, and you're trying to make it look like it's three-dimensional. So you have to pull out every stop that you know in your arsenal of education and knowledge and how you see things to try to create an illusion that is dimensional and textured and has volume and has shape. I just pulled a few backwards, and I can immediately tell that I made a mistake there. Now nobody's going to see it in here, but I'm going to pull a few outwards with it. You know, when you do a wedge backwards and it's not thick to thin throughout the process, it's really noticeable to my eye when I'm seeing it. So try to keep the flow with the hair grain. Try to pull from the base of the quill out. That's both in your paintbrush and the quill in the fur. I'm just continuing on to the bridge of his nose, and these are really short ones. They're little clumpy ones, and if you do a whole bunch of short clumpy ones together like this, and since he's snarling, his nose kind of wrinkles up a little bit, so you want to create a wrinkle surface that goes around, and this is kind of created with short little brush strokes that roll around the top of the surface, so you can kind of treat them like little sausages or little fingers in the wrinkles. Like look at an old wrinkle dog or something and see how it moves. Again, front-on visual of a snarling wolf is nice to study too, because you can see what it's doing from a different angle, so you know what you're trying to achieve from the side angle. With my reference, you can see that it's a little bit flatter than I like. I'm embellishing this a little bit, and it's a little bit blurry, so I'm taking a little bit of artistic license. I think I can do this since I've studied it so much. I can probably make this guy look a little nastier. I'm going to move on up to the teeth now and just do some highlights on that. There's only so much I can show you about this fur. Now if you take a look at the tooth up here, we have a multitude of highlights within the teeth where the sun has hit it. The light source is definitely from the front and a little bit from the top. So I'd say our light source is coming in about like this. Whenever I start a project, I like to pick my light source, especially if I'm inventing the light. It's good to identify where your light is. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and do a little bit more of a central light, and I did this already on the tooth. I put a little bit of highlight to the middle as opposed to just on the front. What this is doing is it's giving me a little more dimension to the tooth. Now with the paintbrush you can do the same thing. Just a little bit of a highlight, really pull them out, and this is where a thinner mixture works really nice. So I dipped a little bit into my thinner that's in the tray next to the paint, and you just pull it out with a little bit of a highlight. The back side too is nice to just put a little bit of a backlighting on. This will distinguish this tooth from the tooth behind it. Now if we find that these brush strokes are a little harsh, and they can tend to be harsh really easy, all we have to do is chase this a little bit with a really translucent color that's very close to it. So I can go back in here with a little bit of a brown gold mixture that's cooled off maybe with a bit of blue or a bit of black, very subtly, and I can just chase that out a little bit so it's not as obvious. You can also inversely go in with white and just chase a little bit of a white highlight over top of this, and it will make it blend back into the tooth a lot better. Now this goes true for anything you're painting. This could be a skull, this could be, you know, a dragon that you've done. This works true for just about any object that you can paint. Now we're getting some really nice highlights in here. I've also chased this up into the gum line, catching reflections on this. And as you do this, you can really see how those gums start to get really wet and juicy. You know, you can tell there's a bit of saliva running around in his mouth. You know, this is a beautiful thing. You know, I love when stuff starts to sing. This is probably the favorite part of a project for me, where you can really make that project dance.
little highlights in the darks of the gum. You can see that on our reference if we move back up. Now there's the highlight I just put in right there. This is a little bit diffused. I think the photo was a little bit on the blurry side. We can paint it that way with the paintbrush, or we can tighten it up a little bit and make it sharper with the airbrush. This is just going to give a different look to your actual overall painting. And one is not better than the other. It's just a personal choice. I have clients that really get off on this brush work that's really tight and detailed. They feel like they got a Robert Bateman or something out of this. There's nothing wrong with that. And some guys like a really blurred, diffused look, long as the detail is implied to it. You can choose which one you like. Now I'm working upside down still. And it's just because my brush strokes are working better for this part of it. Sometimes it's confusing to flip your brain around upside down just to try to see what's going on in the reference. But long as you got your reference on the same angle as your painting or very close, then you're going to get that grain right. The best thing to do is just no different than the airbrush, is try to get the best angle of approach for your brush stroke or your airbrush stroke. And you guys will find your own pace. You'll find what works the best for you. I can dip really fast, wedge it out. There, I'm loaded up, going again. And when I'm in the shop working, I usually sit at a high chair. I've had this high chair since I was about 3. And it's been refinished about 6 times. It has 2 steps below it. I put my feet up on the second step and the first step. I lay the project usually down on my lap. This way I can move it around. I have my workbench right next to me where I can dip paint to my right. And then I rotate the project around on my lap. My reference is taped up to the table right in front of me, so my eyes don't have to travel very far to the reference. And my paints are right there. And then I just fly at this. I can do thousands of strokes in minutes almost. And you'll find a pace that you can go. I'm working really slow right now for the camera to catch it, so you can kind of see. But I'm just going to do a little section as fast as I do at the shop. And I just start going like... It's just bam, bam, bam. I'm hitting this hard and fast. Try to look styling when you do this too. You never know when a camera's around. Every once in a while, I'm going to make a mistake here and just show you what happens, how you can fix this too. Here's the problem with a lot of ones. If you don't dip it and wedge it out on your paper well enough, you can hit it really hard. See how bold that is? Have a good look at that. Now if you go fast enough, just a little fingerprint, bam, like this, you pull it out and you fix your mistake. And it's usually the first brush stroke that you put on is the one that goes bad for you. If you know the first one's there and it works, then all the rest of them are going to follow along suit and work for you. So be prepared to go in there right away and wipe it out if it's bad. As I'm going further back on the wolf right now, you can see I'm starting to lengthen out my quill strokes. I'm just dragging them a little bit further because as the fur goes back, the fur gets a little bit longer. And I'm going a little bit thicker. And to go thicker, all you do is just load up the brush a little heavier. You take a little more of the brush and bend it back. As you bend it back, more of the paintbrush is actually making contact with the surface of the paint. And this will give you a little bit thicker brush stroke. Now you won't get as many brush strokes out of each one because you're laying a little bit more paint. So you might only get 15 or 20 strokes out of a brush now, instead of like 20 or 30 when you're doing it smaller. Okay, I'm back onto the ear here, or starting on the ear. Now this is really interesting. The reference, this is going to be a tough area because the fur just goes, now see, I just went a little too heavy. Just as I was telling you, I wipe it out, it's gone. So I got to take a little bit of paint off of there and then try again. Now these ones really curl and swirl a lot. And they're twisting in a lot of different directions. And that's because they're coming out at you. Some of them are folding back towards the front of them and twisting around back up. And I just got to kind of trust what I'm seeing here and pull that off. As I move up, some of these quills are getting longer. Now if you want some really thin ones, all you do is just barely touch the surface. I kind of just pull the tip really lightly on this part. And see how long my strokes are getting now as these kind of fill in? And I'm going a little bit thinner now. And try to clump some of these as well. You know, a lot of these, the hair will or the fur will kind of clump up together. And you'll get little clusters of it. And this makes a nice consistency too by being inconsistent. If you can put 3 or 4 clumps together and they pull off, then it's not like everything's the same. If I went and did everyone on the same angle like this, it would look like a computer or a machine had done it. And or he just got back from the beauty salon or something. And you know, these little tufts and stuff give them a little bit of a nastiness to them too, which is really quite beautiful in the long run. And these are a little harsh right now. I'd probably benefit myself from dropping in a drop of black or a drop of two complementary colors like brown and blue, and that will really gray out my white and be a little darker. Maybe we should try that right now and you'll see how well this works for us. I've got some detail cobalt blue. Now cobalt blue with a brown will mix a gray eventually if you get the right mixture. So I know that the cobalt blue is a lot stronger pigment than the brown. So I'm going to put one drop in here. There we go, controlled. I'm going to grab the brown. I'm going to go 3 or 4 drops of brown because I know the blue is that powerful. And this is a root beer brown, but any brown will work. Root beer brown is fairly weak. If I had a darker burnt umber or something, it'd be a lot stronger. So I got about 4 drops there. Now I'm not going to utilize all this. So I'm going to start with the blue. I know it's stronger. I'm going to really control it. I'm not going to load up a lot on my brush. This will go a long ways in my... You see how blue that's getting right away? Now that's just the start of my graying out. And I'm going to contaminate my paint because I'm only going to use this once. Now I'm loading up a lot of this. And I think it's going to need quite a bit. If you can take a look at this, the blue is still dominating. As soon as that blue starts to go away, it's going to be taken over by sort of a milky gray. But this is more of a pure gray. If you just drop black into it, it's really obvious to me what kind of gray it is. But if you look at the Wolf reference, there's a lot of blue grays, brown grays into the reference. So that's why I'm mixing this way. It's a lot purer system. This comes from a lot of color theory. If you're an oil painter and you come from a background of acrylics with a brush, you'll understand the mixing of paint. And it's good to take a course at your local art college about color theory. It'll help a lot. Now, it's not wrong to add black in there, too. We could drop a black in there, and it's just going to cool it off more. In fact, I'll just do one to show you. I'm just going to do one drop right into it. And this is just going to cool it off even more. But the gray will change. It won't be as blue, or it won't have as much brown in it. Now, I just found out we have a consultant on the staff here today. We have Craig, the owner of Cretex Autowear. He's brought in a lot of new products down, and he explained to me today over breakfast that blacks have 2 different tones to them. They're either a brown tone or a blue tone to them. And you'll see when you atomize your paint that it's going to go one direction or the other when you add black. I can tell which ones are which, and over time you'll see this. Your eyes will get conditioned to it. I want to add a little bit more blue, a little more brown into it. I think the blue is a better color to go with right now because the area that I'm working on his forehead has more of a blue tint. This can be time consuming, but it's well worth it. So now I'm ready to go. I'm going to add a bit more thinner to it. My thinner's in this section. And that's just going to create a nice thinner flow to it. So let's get back to the painting. Okay, I'm back to where that fur was a little too bright. And now I'm going to start just below it so you can see how effective the darker gray is. Now see how the darker gray is going in there and it's looking so natural? If I had done that up here, and I'm just going to work back into it, it's going to look like it belongs more. This is going to save me a lot of grief with the airbrush where I have to go back in and get rid of it so it's not so obvious. But if you do this step for every little area in here, you know, where it's a little warmer and you change it, you're spending a lot of time in the mixing palette. So I do a tap dance between, is it faster for me to cover it up with the airbrush and tint it down, or is it faster for me to mix the right color in the palette? And we're back into it again. Mixture is starting off a lot brighter. And you've got to keep in mind, too, that this paint won't stay the same color. Once you've mixed it and you lay it down, it'll either dry darker or lighter. This particular mixture is probably going to dry a little darker than what it's going on with. And this, again, takes lots of time and experience to understand your products before you know what it's going to do. It's very marginal. It's only going to change about 5% between dry and dark or light from what you've put it on with. I'm going to turn this wolf around right now so we can kind of see where we're at with it. Now, we could keep this brush stroke going for the next hour, hour and a half. We can do 3-4 layers. I don't think it's going to pay off to go any further with this guy on camera. We could also go in and mix a really dark mixture and get a lot of these little dark lines in here that I put in with the airbrush and take it to a further level. If you want to see someone who's a master at this, look up Carl Brender. He's a wildlife artist who's just phenomenal for fur detail. It really kicks butt. It's beautiful. Study some of these painters that do this stuff too. It's really good, and it might be helpful in seeing how all these things I'm saying about grain and fur will pay off. And a lot of these guys that do these wildlife renderings actually work in a technique very similar to this. Okay, I'm just chasing this out a little bit. I have some transitions here that are a little harsh that I think need to be blended out. So I'm going to go in with a darker gray and cover some of this up. But I'm going to show you a couple techniques first that kind of replace the paintbrush even a little bit. Okay, what I have here is a pigment pen. This is made by Micron. This is a .01. They come in different sizes, but it's a permanent ink that's waterproof and fade proof, and it's an archival ink. Now this is compatible with the Cretex AutoWare. I don't use this technique too much anymore. I used to use it a lot. Now this is black, so you got to be very careful with it. It's very harsh, but I can go in and just put my little dark lines back in with a pen. I can just kind of draw with them. Now these are really sharp, so I don't want to use them too much. I find these really valuable when you're doing scales in a dragon. I used to use that a lot. I've kind of got away from it a little bit now because I think my airbrush skills are a lot tighter over time, and I push that a bit harder. But you might want to dabble with this and try it. I caution you very carefully not to use it too much. If you use it too much, it'll look like a drawing and not a painting. So just use it in the right applications where you see some really sharp areas that kind of need it. In a very, very small project like a dragon and you have individual scales, I find this stuff pretty amazing to work with. And again, I'm just pulling away from the brush strokes on this and creating a dark area in it. Now, this is going to look odd if I only do this area. This has forced me to kind of go through the whole project with it. But if you can see really closely here how it kind of just cuts into it and adds that dark dimension. Now, I think you can get these in a few various colors, but the selection of colors are fairly weak on it. I'm concentrating on this area above the eye. There's a few little dark areas in there. What I'm doing is just putting in some little ones to create some rows of fur. And I'm just doing the dark area and I'm just pulling them out. And if you can kind of see that in tight, it's given a lot of depth, but it is fairly harsh. I don't think this step was totally needed on this project, but it could be used. Try it, see if you like it, and especially try it in other application. It's really good for little cracks in a skull, as long as you blend it out with the paintbrush or the airbrush afterwards a little bit. And I'll show you how that's done in a second. I got myself a different product now. This is FW Artists ink. They're acrylic base. They're a lot thinner than the AutoWare, and I can use this as an ink but still compatible. I use a fair bit of this product when I'm doing my tight detail. I also brought a Rotterdam art pen. Now these art pens are really quite beautiful. I use them in my sketchbooks when I'm doodling. I also brought myself a little suction feed. Now this plugs into the brush. This I can suction feed it and pull it out of any color of ink, and I can draw with it very similar to what I was doing with the pigment pen. There is a problem with this. You have metal on metal. It's a metal quill. As you can see, this is based on a co-quill pen, the old steel nibs. You can scratch your paint with that tip if you're not careful. So you have to have a light flow, and it works best if you have a good base already going. So if you have a whole bunch of, say, AutoWare white down, it'll absorb into that quite well. And this is going to take a little while to get used to with this technique, but you can control all your colors. You can custom mix them, suck them into our suction feed, and this is kind of nice. It's just a twist cap on it. Dip it into the ink and just pull it back, and this will suck up that paint in there, and we plug it into the pen and away we go. Okay, what we have now is our sepia. Now I use the transparent line. The opaque line will clog up this pen very well. The transparents are perfect for this application. Now you want to clean this out fairly quickly. These will dry in and clog up your nib over time, and that only takes a matter of about a half an hour. I have my siphon all the way down, dip it in, and now I'm sucking it back up. I don't need a lot for this application, so I'm only putting a quarter of amount in. Open up my pen, I'm just going to insert this in here and work it in. Kind of pops in. This is a really tight fit. This is a new pen. Put the cap on, and it's really going to aid myself, since I haven't worked with one of these for a while, to get a new piece of paper out and do some practicing. Now it's going to take a while to load. Oh, wow, that went right through right away. That surprises me. It's been a while since I've worked with one of these, and you got to be concerned a little bit about this. If you don't work with them right, you can see the little dots left behind, and those will be really obvious in your product. I'm just trying to work my strokes so I know that it's going to work. Now, I got to be light with this. Otherwise, I'm just going to etch my panel or your client's gas tank, and I don't think he's going to be real happy about that, and then you're going to have to use a lot of clears to bury it. So we're just going to go light. Now, depending on how much porous material we have, I put a bit of base on there. Hopefully this will flow nice. There's lots of times that it works really well. There's other times I go on it, it doesn't work very well. So I just bail from the process altogether. So I get it going, and there, now we got some brown going on it. I'm noticing something right away. You know how we've pulled the paintbrush from front to back and getting thick to thin? As I'm working on this, it's doing the opposite for me. If you can really notice that, the wedges are going in reverse. So I'm going to improvise. I'm going to flip this panel around and work it backwards. And I'm going to pull them in reverse. And what do you know? It works better this way. I didn't expect that one. I tell you, it has been a while. I used to work this way a lot just for the detail factor. And if you take a close look, it's quite nice. Now, this is still a little wet. I can actually probably smear this a little bit and blend it out a little bit so it's not so obvious. Again, this has its particular application, but I kind of wanted to show you a bunch of different methods on how to get really, really tight detail into this. One is not better than the other. I got to really emphasize that. You got to really feel out your client and your personal taste on what you want to achieve. And sometimes this is a good way to go, and sometimes, you might want to leave it just the way it was. Like some of this area in here isn't so bad. I think it could be worked a little tighter with the airbrush, but I mean, it has a nice feel and appeal all by itself. The areas in here aren't so bad either. This is kind of a technique where you can incorporate all 3 of these techniques or 4 of these techniques into one piece. You can do 1 or 2 of them, or just leave it at 1. And this is a decision you'll have to make on your own. The big advantage to this pen is just that you can really custom mix your inks to it, or your liquid acrylics. You can get a light yellow in this, you can get a blue in this, and when you have the Pigment pen, quite often you're limited to what they manufacture. And I usually only see black, but I know they have, I think, a sepia red as well. If you have the whole bank of FW paints, you can mix whatever you like and get whatever color you want out of it. And that's a nice feature. In concluding this, we're going to go to one last final thing. We're just going to go in and mix up some paint back in the airbrush, and we're going to soften this up just so it's not so obvious. And that's a lot of the hang-up with guys who have come from an art background and tend to use a lot of paint work or brush work in their airbrush because they get frustrated, they can't get the details, so they go to a paintbrush to get it. And in the end, it's very bold and it stands out really harsh on there because they don't know how to control the both of them together. So the final step is really to try to blend out some of our brush strokes so they don't look so obvious. Be nice and consistent and look more real in the long run. I've repositioned my panel to work effectively for me, and I've mixed up a blue-brown mixture, heavier on the blue, which means the blue is only about 1 or 2 drops compared to about 10 brown. And what I'm doing now is, if you can see here, I didn't like this area because I was too harsh with the white. That's why we mixed up the gray. Now I'm just kind of tinting it out. And I'm just doing little clumps and just tinting it out, blending it out. And you can see how now this is getting really unified. This last little step is, I think, really important. Some of those black pigment marks that I put in there, they're going to be tough to get rid of or to blend in because the black is so harsh. And that's why I mix a lot of these darker colors with blues and browns and try to mix darker grays that are very pure without white in them. And I find that they're not quite the whole that black creates. Black sometimes is just really harsh. It works as a whole. And you've probably heard this before with oil painters and acrylic painters and watercolor. It tends to hold fairly true. Although there is points where you really like using it, like in pupils and stuff. I don't think it's 100% bad, but I prefer to mix up you know, a darker color with complementary colors. Like a really dark color with cherry red and a cobalt blue and a little bit of deoxidized purple and stuff. They're really nice. They get really nice and rich. I prefer to use that to black when I can. But sometimes you are forced into black. And we'll go in here under the eye. I'm looking at my reference a little bit. And right now what we've created is, my photo is fairly blurry. I've actually created more detail in this area than what my reference has. And if this was a clearer photo, it'd be easier to render this tight. So if I was in my own studio and I wasn't trying to teach you this, I think I would have probably left it freehand with just a little bit of brushwork, a little minimal amount of brushwork, then tinted it out. I probably wouldn't have gone to the step of the Pigma pen or the art pen. If I had a better reference that was a little more detailed, and it's really important to get the best reference possible. A lot of projects can fail or succeed just alone based on your reference. We're just blending this out now, and you can also do a nice little tint just from a distance. I'm doing a nice little mist right now over top of all this, and as we go to the back and chase it out, I've got this really soft blend coming to the back. The more I blend this out, the more it's just going to disappear into that background. I see it start to disappear. This is nice right now. You know, picking some clumps around my highlights, picking out some of the beginning of the stems. Now I got a really thin mixture, and I got to be careful I don't get it to skate. I just noticed it start to skate right there. You can see that, guys? That's what I call skating. Fix that. I'm just going to smudge it out. Do it with the grain of the fur. It just blended right back in. Touch it back up with a few more. Sometimes the screw up, if you catch it early enough, that's all it takes to fix it. And you're going to make a lot of them, because I still do. As you can tell, we have a very matte finish on our background right now and over our surface. These panels and tanks are intended to be clear coated afterwards. So when we're done this project, we're going to put on a urethane solvent-based clear. Now you can use any manufacturer, Sikkens, RM, House of Color, Ditzler, Herbert Standox. It doesn't matter. They're all the urethanes are pretty much compatible. I have painters that do my clears for me. I don't tend to do them anymore because I'm doing too much art. But when this comes out done afterwards, it's going to be so shiny. It's going to look like a sheet of glass. I use a solvent-based wax and grease remover, the mildest form that you can find, and ask your paint supplier about this. After this is dried, which only takes a couple minutes, sometimes I hit it with a hair dryer, we can wet this down with wax and grease remover. As long as we don't wipe it really hard, it shouldn't affect the paint too much. You will pull off a little bit of the overspray with the wax and grease remover, but you can kind of visualize it and see what it's going to look like with cleared. And this will bring out some of your mistakes of overspray. You'll kind of see them before it goes for clear, and it can save you a lot of hassle and grief having to re-clear after you do a touch-up because you made a mistake or left a mistake that you couldn't see. And we'll do that right in a second here after I'm done tinting this. Right now I'm just picking up my dark areas in the reference. I'm just blending everything out and just tinting everything that we airbrushed and what we paintbrushed and I'm trying to marry all these processes together right now. Now, I didn't go through this whole wolf. I just did the top half with the paintbrush and the Pigma pen. To have some uniform consistency, I would have brought it through the whole painting and painted everywhere. And you guys can go home and spend another 7, 10, 15 hours on this and make it right. But right now, we've got this guy about as close as we need for this video. He's looking pretty sweet. The last thing you do is the whiskers. And there's a couple whiskers above the eyebrow and a whole bunch of them on the snout. And I've actually sent projects out a couple of times without doing the whiskers. And yes, I had to wet sand it and redo it and then re-clear. And you only do that a couple times and you get more thorough with your work because every time you have to re-clear it's costing you a couple $100 usually. So try to remember to be thorough that you completed everything and you got rid of all your overspray. And on a black panel like this, black overspray is just as easy as matching the black and spraying it out. I can do a lot of different techniques to complete these whiskers. I can freehand it in, but since we've done brush strokes, I'm going to mix up a brush stroke that's probably on the black side because our whiskers are fairly dark with a little bit of a highlight on them. There's some dark ones in there. There's a little bit of a highlight on the top edge of the whiskers. The back sides are fairly dark, so we're going to have to mix up two little mixtures in the paintbrush. I still have those in my palette. Then we'll just put these whiskers in and blend them out quickly, and we're going to call this baby complete. Okay, I just mixed a dark gray. I took that blue and brown that was mixed from the last section, added a couple drops of black, and we're ready to go for some whiskers here. Really look at your angles of the whiskers. You only get one chance to do this, because if you lay it in and it's wrong, you got to do all the background behind it again. So these are just long strokes. It's like pinstriping a little bit. You lay down the brush and away you go and pull it back. I keep this mixture very thin if I can. If you make it too thick, I find that it makes a bit of a mess. And I'd like to err on the side of it being a little bit too light than a little bit too dark, because I can always chase that line a second time and match it up. And there's usually a couple little guys in here that are a little bit darker than the rest and pull off. Can you see that in there? Those are nice and subtle and they're quite beautiful. Now I got to drop a white in here, and this is going to deal with my highlight. Now I'm keeping my gray and just adding a little bit of white to the gray. That'll get me my highlight. We talked about this earlier, but that flipping the brush 180 and getting that wedge is really important. It does give you that little sharp line. Okay, I'm bringing it over to my whisker, and I'm turning my wedge, again, straight up. So the narrow edge, I'm going to take the very front edge of that line and just pull a little bit of a highlight onto it and pull it off. These are fairly long, and all you have to do is catch the top edge of a few of them, and that's very subtle. If you do this process too bold, these will stand out like holes. They'll look so nasty. So really err on the side of being lighter and try to be as thin as you can. Practice a couple dozen of them on paper first or on a test panel before you take it to this step, because fixing these are really, really hard. You have to redo everything underneath it, and you can lose an hour, hour and a half just by putting one bad whisker in. Okay, now it's time for your John Henry. I always sign the same way. Same technique as what I used before. Really quick. You put the date on her. Got my cross-eyed on there. I'm super happy. She's complete. I've got my wax and grease remover here right now, and I'm going to apply this on here. I'm just going to drip it on. And I'm just going to inspect for overspray, any problems that I can see in here, any little hiccups. Your eye will see a little bit more when it looks like it's cleared, and this gives you a really artificial look on how it's going to look cleared. So I'm just going to apply this on slowly, have a little inspection, and you guys will see how this matte finish will go away. This is just going to drip down. You can air dry this afterwards to get rid of it, or you can even gently wipe it, but I don't recommend wiping too much. It does tend to pull a little bit of paint off of it. Now I'm looking at this a little bit. There's a bit of overspray around the outsides. This can be solved with just going in with a little bit of black, and that won't be a problem. I can do that in seconds. You can also lay the positive stencil back down that we had cut initially and just spray around it loosely, and that'll keep your overspray off the teeth, etc. Again, be very careful around your edges so you don't lose your edge. Like, better to freehand this area, lay the stencil to touch up the overspray around the teeth. Okay, I think we're done with this bad boy. He's looking nice and evil. Sort of looks like he could eat your mother-in-law, so that's what we were striving for. This is perfect. I want to show you another little panel that I pulled off here. This is this bad Doberman. He's really cool. And this is what you want to strive for. You really want to incorporate that airbrush with the paintbrush and really be flawless with it. And I hope this works out for you. I'm Blake McCully from Cross-Eyed Airbrushing, representing airbrush action and auto air colors. Thank you very much.